Welcome to the Global Peace Film Festival Lives Online Conversation 2022 Festival Edition. Please welcome me, Kelly Devine, the Artistic Director, and Nina Strike, the Executive Director, as we welcome Ramesh Sharma, the Director of Ahimsa, Gandhi, the Power of the Powerless. This film will be showing both in our live program, which begins September 19th and ends September 25th, and as a part of our virtual on-demand program, which begins September 26th and ends October the 2nd. All the information about our in-person events, film screenings like Ahimsa, can be found at our film festival website, peacefilmfest.org. And now, please join us in welcoming Ramesh Sharma. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me from India.
It is such a pleasure to see you and for you to join us from, as you said, from India. Let's start by talking a little bit about your film. Tell our audience all about Ahimsa.
Yeah, well, as you know, the film is explained in the title of the film, Ahimsa, Gandhi, the Power of the Powerless. These are three very potent themes which have kind of shaped the 20th century. Gandhi was perhaps the greatest export from India after the Buddha, if you can say it. I mean, if not equal to a Buddha, because he was a man whose ideology of fighting injustice, fighting tyranny, fighting colonialism was incredibly innovative. He believed that you could fight injustice, but you could fight it through nonviolence. You didn't need to use or take arms to fight for your freedom, or fight for your social equity, or fight for anything, because there was something that he'd evolved and which was called the civil disobedience. And of course, he sort of dipped into other philosophers, other great people like Thoreau from America, people like Leo Tolstoy from Russia, people like Jesus Christ and his Sermon on the Mount, because Gandhi believed that the only way that you could really win this battle against a very powerful adversary was through the moral stature that you would create with your own movement. And Satyagraha, as he called it, the force of truth, began really in South Africa, where he had gone as a barrister, as a lawyer, but he became actually the exponent for the Indians there who were being marginalized, who were being, sort of sidelined by the very, very autocratic, racially, in fact, you could call it cruel, the South African apartheid government. And so Gandhi decided that I would fight this. Indians couldn't own properties at certain places. Indians couldn't travel at certain areas of South Africa without having a card or without a permission. And he said, this is wrong. We are all equal citizens. And so began his search for a method to fight this amazing, powerful government that was there. And he did it through nonviolence. Now, this idea of nonviolence, really, he took it to India, where, of course, we had the colonial rule of the British. And he managed to completely paralyze the British, because his idea was very simple. Gandhi believed that if you had people who didn't cooperate with the government, if you did not become a participant in the government's, follies of their policies, you could paralyze them. And so he began the Great Salt March, where he had thousands of people coming in. But my film is not just about Gandhi. My film really is about how Gandhi's influence, Gandhi's ideology went out of India and influenced the entire seminal movements of the 20th century. People who were fighting for from colonialism, people who are fighting racial tyranny, people who are fighting almost every kind of social injustice. And so my film looks at the civil rights movement and the impact it had, Gandhi's philosophy had, with Martin Luther King and with James Lawson and with John Lewis and all these people. And we look at what he did in South Africa with Nelson Mandela and the fight against apartheid. We look at solidarity movement in Poland, where Lech Walesa, who's in my film, interviewed in my film, talks about how Gandhi's nonviolence influenced it. Because one of the things that Gandhi realized is that if you used violence to fight these powerful people, you would be in the losing end. Because once somebody uses violence, they were strong enough to crush you. So you had to keep that moral high ground and hit out at the conscience of the people. And that is what he did. When, in fact, during the Salt March, when the British soldiers came to crack down on his satyagrahis, as he called them, the volunteers, he made them a promise that you would not fight back. You would take those beating. And there were reporters he was also a man who believed in strategy, media strategy. So he had all these reporters who had been invited, and they saw this barbarity that was going on. It went across all over the world. It was there in every American newspaper, British newspapers, and it kind of shook the conscience of the world. And that began slowly to realize, the British began to realize that what would you do with somebody like Gandhi? I mean, you can't put 50,000 people into prison. They just didn't know how to handle this concept of nonviolence. And this is exactly what Martin Luther King did. As James Lawson talks about how he trained the people during the civil rights movement to take the barbarism of the white supremacists who would come and not allow them to sit in certain restaurants or bars. Rosa Parks is a classic example of a woman who sits in a bus and she's not allowed to sit, then she refuses to get out. And they can do nothing about it. And then begins the boycott of the bus in Birmingham, which went on for months till people realized it was hitting their economy. And this is what the film is about: the power of nonviolence, the power of the powerless, but done through Ahimsa. In Ahimsa for Gandhi was love in action. He always said that Ahimsa could not be taught; it must be lived. And I'm hoping that this, through my film, really is basically my attempt to bring back the power of Gandhi's ideology, the power of Gandhi's message to the modern world, so that people would understand that nonviolence in this day and age still remains relevant. It still is a potent force for conflict resolution, for getting your justice, for whatever that you require. As long as you use the means of nonviolence, you'll probably, you will get your the goals. And my film looks at this through a global arc. I have almost all the major players, ringside players, who talk about their experience. I have the grandsons of Gandhi. I have scholars, historians who have been interviewed, who have studied the entire technique of Gandhi, because Gandhi has many, many dimensions, but I have only chosen the dimension of nonviolence. But the man is a holistic man. He believed that unless and until you lived a particular kind of life, nonviolence would be meaningless. For instance, in India, when he was doing this not, I wouldn't call it a battle, but this movement against the British, there were some of his followers who burned down a police station where a number of policemen were killed. He stopped his movement. And he was, there were all these big leaders of Indian freedom movement, from our former, who went on to become the first prime minister, Nehru, Patel, all his colleagues. They said, "What are you doing? We're just gathering momentum and you're stopping this." He said, "No, because you haven't learned what nonviolence means. You cannot burn down a police station. You cannot be so radical and expect me to support you. This is not it. You have to learn. And that's what he did. He trained people of how to actually fight nonviolence. And this is what Martin Luther King did. In fact, if you talk to James Lawson, it's there in my film. He explains how they trained everybody who was there, that it was so important that however much you are provoked, because that is what the adversary would want you to do. That is what Solidarity did. That is what Lech Walesa did. He rather went to prison. He had his people all come out in the streets, but they didn't use a single weapon. And the day the weapon was used by the adversary, that was the end of the Soviet Union. That was the day Czechoslovakia became free in that sense. So it became ungovernable for themselves. But the same thing happened in South Africa. And it is all there in my film. So I think my film is very important in as much this is the first time that we have taken Gandhi's influence around the world. So far we have seen the great film made by Richard Attenborough, Gandhi, which everybody talks about. In fact, when I was trying to raise money for my film, everybody said, why do you want to make another film on Gandhi? That's a definitive film already made by Richard Attenborough. And my answer was very simple. Attenborough just told the story of Gandhi as a biopic. I am talking about Gandhi as an idea that still lives. I'm not interested in Gandhi's, his biography. I'm not interested where he was born or what he did, or, I'm interested in the power of his imagination, the power of his idea, the power of his message, and how it influenced seminal movements around the world, and how it is still relevant, because it's a perennial message. It's a message that will remain forever. It's one of those incredible, what you might say, epiphanies that people get. And the irony of it is that Gandhi first articulated his message in Johannesburg on the 6th of September, 1906, when he was fighting against the apartheid government. It was not the apartheid government then, it was still the British government, but he was fighting against them for the rights of the Indians. And 9/11 today, around the world, in America and everywhere, is actually, symbolized by the greatest act of violence that took place in the Twin Towers in New York City. And the irony is that you have two pillars. You have 9/11 in America that represents perhaps the extreme form of violence done by terrorists. And then you have 9/11, 100 years, almost more than 100 years ago, represented by Gandhi, articulated by him for peace and, achieving your same goals, but through peaceful means. And that is what I think is going to be important. If our younger generations, we need that. We need that for a younger generation to understand that this world, which is full of anarchy, which is full of hatred, which is full of divisiveness, it needs a healing hand. And people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela and Havel and Dalai Lama, they are inspirational figures. They're iconic figures. They're the only hope we have. If we do not study them, if we do not represent them in our politics, in our social, what you might call us, in our society, we are going to be, as Gandhi says, non-violence is love in action. And Martin Luther King says in my film that it is not a choice between violence and non-violence. It's a choice between non-violence and non-existence. Because we live in a world where every major country has nuclear bombs. I mean, well, you see what's happening in Ukraine. You see what's happening with Russia. Russia has already started attacking the nuclear plants of Ukraine. Now, whether they'll go further than what they've been doing so far. But the danger is one wrong move, and that's it. So we need to make sure that there is a major effort towards nonviolence. This is it. This is the century of dialogue. This is a century where you must, it's a very long process, the idea of achieving something through nonviolence. But we cannot lose heart. And that's why I mean, this is what the film is about. This is what I hope to achieve with this film, that you are watching a film which is going to inspire you that nonviolence is relevant and nonviolence is powerful.
Thank you, Ramesh, for going to such detail. It leads me to a question that is pertinent to why I thought this film was so important to program at a festival such as ours, is that we have a lot of young people who come to our festival, and we also have a lot of organizers and activists come to our festival. And I think sometimes within groups that are trying to organize themselves, that they can confuse tactics with strategy and with principles. And I think what your film does so beautifully is to separate those out so that you can see what the guiding principles are, how to think strategically, and then the tactics follow, not necessarily the other way around. So can you tell us what you think some of the things that are most misunderstood about Gandhi's principle, and how you were inspired by that?
Well, one of the things that I think everybody misunderstands nonviolence is that it is pacifism, that it is cowardice, that you're really not fighting. That's not true. Nonviolence is very active. It's an act of bravery. It is far more brave than having a gun, because you really got nothing. You got nothing but your idea and your non-cooperation. The most important thing in nonviolence is civil disobedience. You know, as one of the historians in my film talks about, and she says that one of the reasons why the British went on for so long in India was because of Indian cooperation. We cooperated with them in their sins. Gandhi, on the other hand, refused to do that. When they came out with a salt tax, he said, I am not going to pay that tax. You can do what you want. But he could move thousands of people across the country to do the same thing. You know, when they came in and said that we were sort of getting clothes made in Manchester, as against the hand-woven clothes that were made, the khadi clothes that were made here, he said, no, we are going to boycott British clothes. You know, it was called the Swadeshi movement. I mean, he had this incredible way of involving the masses to understand that the moment you cooperate with them, you have lost the battle. Now, it's going to be it's a tough one. It's not something that you can do it overnight, you know, and that is what people must realize. They must have patience. I mean, for instance, you had these young boys. I mean, I was so impressed with them, and probably it's not in my film, but it's one of the greatest examples of nonviolence that I've seen in America in recent times. It was the Parkland high school boys. After the killing, they began their own movement. They raised millions of dollars to move that, and it was such a peaceful movement. They marched all the way to Washington to change a very, very powerful NRA lobby against use of guns, and, you know, making sure that there were some controls on that. And that was an example of it. You had, for instance, in America, you had Cesar Chavez, you know, the grape worker, you know, the incredible manner in which he organized the whole thing. In fact, Robert Kennedy became one of his greatest supporters, because the man used complete nonviolence and hunger strike, which is what Gandhi did also, to get rights for his workers who were being treated worse than slaves. You know, and so I think that is what you need. You need communities, you need ideas, and it must start. It doesn't need to be a national movement all the time. Sometimes it's a small thing, something to do with your community, and you want it. and you feel that people are getting, that they're really behaving in a manner that really is impacting negatively your community. And you sort of galvanize your people and fight them through these non-violent means. And that is, I think, very important to understand. So I think what you need really is training is, yes, very important. Discipline is very important. But more important than that are the other elements in Gandhi's nonviolence. Because Gandhi's nonviolence, which you'll see in the film, is a holistic thing. He believed that everybody had something of redemption in him. Everybody had something that was good. There was nobody who was totally evil. You could say Hitler was totally evil. Okay, there would be some exceptions. You cannot really always, sort of get everybody under the same umbrella. But Gandhi believed that the most important things in life, apart from his idea of nonviolence, was interfaith love. He believed that you could be a good Christian, you could be a good Hindu, you could be a good Jew, you could be a good Muslim. He never said that your religion is better than mine. He always said, I want you to be a good Muslim. I want you to be a good Jew. Let me be a good Hindu. And that is what was important to him. This interfaith, this interfaith, what you might call collaboration. He said, because that humanity, that compassion, unless and until that is there, nonviolence will not work. Nonviolence basically means accepting somebody. And he also had another term to it. And he was that never hate your enemy. If you have disagreements today, you never know. Tomorrow you will be sitting down with the same person and talking about and making policies which is good for the government and for the people. For instance, in South Africa, you had Nelson Mandela, who went for prison for years and years, 27 years. But when he came out, he didn't have hatred for the white, Afrikaans. He sat with them, negotiated a government with them, and then he set up a peace reconciliation commission, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which basically saved South Africa from a civil war, because of the kind of hatred that was there between those two groups. It could easily have descended into civil war. But this was Gandhian philosophy that Nelson Mandela had imbibed, and Desmond Tutu had imbibed. And the two of them became, in fact, to me, the greatest heroes of that time to stop South Africa from descending into chaos and anarchy.
And one of the central principles of our festival is community story in action. And so we hope that people take something away back into their own lives or into their own communities. So you've been talking so much about that, but just what's the one thing that you would hope? Not everyone will join a movement or will, participate. What's the one thing that you would really hope a viewer would take away from your film?
Well, I think one of the things that I'm hoping they would take away is that they would like to see more of talk of nonviolence in the media. I would like to see a kind of a movement that goes around it, where people begin to realize that in a divisive America, because America is so divided, America is so much in trouble at the moment, it needs a psychiatrist, and one of the psychiatrists it needs really is somebody who can teach them nonviolence, the beauty of nonviolence, the beauty of love, the beauty of forgiveness, the beauty of sitting with your enemies and having a real dialogue, not a politics that separates you, not a politics that takes you, divides you, but rather something that brings you together. I mean, Obama talked about there is no blue state and there is no red state. There is only the United States of America. Well, put it in action. It's all right to say that. And it begins in the community. It begins where the smallest of things that happen. It begins with, first of all, I mean, America will never do that. You don't need so many guns. And if you need guns, keep it at home. Don't walk around with it. Secondly, make sure that from the schools, a film like this is constantly shown. Not just my film, but there are many other films that talk about nonviolence, that talk about compassion, that talk about interfaith harmony. Show them all. Talk about poetry, get literature on this. Let's not, this is what a young man should be doing. He should be organizing clubs, communities, songs, love. There are such incredible, I have always believed that songs are perhaps the greatest communication that you can have for this kind of interfaith harmony. You can have psalms that are blended into hymns, that are blended into Hindu shlokas, that are blended into Hebrew, prayers, and made into one beautiful organic whole. You can think in terms of what John Lennon said about Imagine, or you look at some of the great songs by Bob Dylan and Blowing in the Wind or Joan Baez of that era, and get them today, make it modern, make it rap, make it whichever way a young person can understand. But I think that's important. The important thing is get the idea of nonviolence as a relevant tool, let it become a part of your DNA. And that can only happen if you get these children exposed time and again into this. It doesn't happen overnight. They have been too much brainwashed. Every American programming that I watch, not just America, it's in India, it's in Britain, it's in Germany, it's in France. It's all about hatred. It's all about taking your gun and shooting the other guy. It's all about competitive world power. It's all about disasters. I'm not saying I'm not becoming a moral policeman or something like that. All I'm saying is that let's have a narrative that is a little softer also. And it is up to these young students, younger generation, to really take on the mantle. There are plenty of them. I have great hope. For instance, that young poet who sort of was speaking the inauguration of Biden, the African-American poet, some of her words were soaring. They were almost like Maya Angelou's poems. And that is what you need. You need that kind of an inspirational thing that soars, that makes you for a moment that it's worth being a human being, even in the 21st century.
So one of the things I think your film does so well is to bring the contemporary movements into, threads them with the history of Gandhi and the history of the nonviolent and civil disobedience movements. So what can people watching this do to help you with the film? Obviously help getting the word out, but is there anything else that people can do?
Well,
is there anything else you're working on, or is this your focus right now?
No, at the moment, my focus is to make this film. We lost 2 years because of the pandemic. This film was ready in 2020, and just then the pandemic came in. I couldn't travel, the film couldn't travel, there were no film festivals that were showing live, there was no market shows. So now we are doing that. So if you know anybody who wants to have community screenings where we can raise a little bit of funds, where we can sort of, have, or anybody wants to show it on any television network, or anybody that any way they can help. Or even if they don't raise money, if they can show it in universities, if they can spread the word around and have this film screened and have a robust debate after that. Because I'm not saying that what I've said is the truth and should be taken in with absolutely no debate. No, discuss it, argue about it. You must believe in what you're saying, and you're doing, because if you don't believe in it in your heart totally, it will not work. So if you can have people who can, as I said, spread that, get a think tank people, get some people who are committed to it, who are slightly more, evolved in that sense, who have really worked with this in its movement, who understand this movement, and do a Q&A with them after the screening. That would help, and I think that is what I want. I want really this film to be seen, shown more in America than anywhere else, because I think America has got some kind of a moral leadership in the media. You have colonized the minds of the world through your media. And therefore, it's important to decontaminate it with some of this kind of work.
Very good. Well, that is a call to arms to try and change the media landscape, and we will take up that call to turn the media landscape towards justice and peace rather than the narrative that you described. So thank you very much, Ramesh. Thank you. We've really enjoyed this conversation, and thank you to everyone who has watched this conversation. Again, we've been speaking with Ramesh Sharma, the director of Ahimsa, Gandhi, The Power of the Powerless. If you want to learn more about how you can help and support this film, please go to ahimsa-movie.com. That's ahimsa-movie.com. And again, to see this film, we have 2 screenings during our live events, which begin September 19th and run through September 25th. And then this film can also be seen as a part of our virtual program beginning September 26th and ending October the 2nd. All the information about our film screenings like Ahimsa and our other events can be found by going to peacefilmfest.org. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you at the 20th Global Peace Film Festival this September. Thank you.
Thank you very much.